I'm really happy to be here again with all of you. It's always a great opportunity to share our thoughts and experiences as Dharma friends. But before we go into the another great topic, um, before going into that, I suggest that we pause for a relatively short meditation. And so everybody use your own favorite uh, meditation technique, which you're familiar with, and let's meet again in a few minutes. So here we go again. Good evening, everybody. I'm very happy to be here and for another great topic, as I already said, which is renunciation and skillful means. Um, and I know this word renunciation is a little scary. It's not something that we sort of jump up and down when we hear about it. We tend to feel that is, as the word expresses, some need for us to abandon certain things, and when we hear it, we probably immediately think, okay, what is that that I will have to abandon? Because we are not that much into abandoning anything. So it's not a very enticing word, and I think we have a certain degree of misconception about it. Of course, when we go through the teachings, and especially the teachings of about the vows and all of that, and especially in the Theravada traditions, which are more into that spirit, we would say, we see that it might only concern monks, nuns, and renounced people. So as us as lay people, we don't feel very concerned about that. But the first thing I think we have to understand is that there is nothing, no one, no circumstance, no object, or no property or anything that is bad in itself or it's negative in itself. It's not that by abandoning things we are now safe from any obstacle or anything like that. Being a monk or a nun and having renounced a lay life, having renounced to have to be married, have children, or even to have possessions and have a life, a material life, doesn't guarantee that we actually have true renunciation. Because what we need to renounce is not something external. It's our attachment to those things. It's the whatever is a hindrance in the spiritual path. And things in themselves are never a hindrance. It's our identification with them, our desire to have them as and not only have them for the sake of having it. We are very interested in owning things because they serve as enhancers of our own sense of identity. There's no other reason. So actually, of course, ultimately, the only thing that we have to renounce, and we will have to renounce one day, or we do it progressively, is our sense of a distinct, different, separate, and inherently existing identity. And that's the only thing that we really have to renounce. Now, in a way to achieve that, we might need, and we also have to be humble or maybe realistic to understand that even though external things are never the problem, in our way to become more, what can I say, more relaxed with them, we might need to take some distance. Let's say, for instance, that you love chocolate and you have a liver disease. Now, if you don't have a liver disease, you can eat and you are the kind of person who can eat sweets without putting any weight. You can eat as much chocolate as you can, I mean, as you can afford to buy, and that will not be a problem. Now, if you're not someone like that, if either you put weight or you have a problem with sugar, and of course, chocolate is not a very healthy thing to eat anyway, but let's say that you have a liver disease or some condition that for that makes it that for you eating chocolate is a real poison, you will have to find a way to deal with that. And of course, the best way would be just to um, renounce chocolate. But if you can't do that all at once, at least, then maybe the best way for the time being, until you are completely comfortable and you got used to not eating chocolate, maybe the best way is not to have chocolate around the house anymore. So that's what I mean, and that's the way people normally take renunciation as, maybe as not as the ultimate. Maybe for some people they might think that getting away, let's say getting away from things is the ultimate renunciation, but it's not. Getting away or keeping the distance from things that bring about in us feelings of attachment, aversion, and all of that, it's just all it's just a mean to um, have a break from these feelings by removing ourselves from the from the from being close to those things who steer those feelings in us. So let's say not having chocolate around at home, not going to a chocolate house, not buying chocolate, and that will um, help us getting used to not eating chocolate. But in the ultimate sense, of course, chocolate will never be the problem, because if we come to a point where we can relax about that, not fight inwardly against the desire of eating chocolate, then we might have chocolate around and just not eat it because we don't feel the need. So we don't need to be removed from the presence of those things once we got used to not needing them, and then we can start to relax about them. When we still have lots of desire for certain things, whether it's food or material well-being or whatever it is, if we're still very much attached to them, then we will be, and we are constantly in contact with them, we are always in a state of inner tension, inner fight, because we are, half of us want those things and the other part of us doesn't. So we keep this inner fighting or this inner tension. We are torn between two things. And that's when, of course, when we are in that state, then the idea of renunciation is very unpleasant in one way, because we don't want to let go of that part of ourselves that's still holding to these things. But on the other hand, once we really put the distance between ourselves and whatever it is that is creating all these feelings in ourselves, it also gives a sense of relief. So actually, renunciation or outer renunciation, we might say. So outer renunciation in the sense of putting this distance between us and whatever it is of outer phenomena that steer these emotions in us, it gives a sense of relief instead of being unpleasant. It ends up by being something that gives us a certain degree of peace. It's like, for instance, we can perhaps have a better understanding of this. Imagine that you have a conflict with somebody at work, for instance, and every time you go, every morning when you go to work, office or wherever, you have to face that person, And whatever that person does after a while, even if the person is not saying anything or having any interaction with you, just seeing that person stirs in us a great deal of feelings, unpleasant feelings, and unpleasant thoughts. So, for instance, when we go on holidays, and now for 3 weeks we don't have to go to work, there's a sense of relief, because even though perhaps during the first few days we will still think about that person, and every time we think about him or her, and sometimes even by hearing a name, his name or her name, we get all worked out. But after a while it subsides, and by the end of the vacations we certainly will be calmer, and those feelings won't be so present, and that's when we have to return. So go back to the same conflict as before. So renunciation is not necessarily, even though for us might feel like something, and the idea might feel unpleasant, actually in reality might be something that brings a lot of peace and relief, actually. Uh, but so we have to be humble, perhaps, or realistic, as I said, to really understand what are the main hindrances, what is preventing us from having peace within ourselves. And of course, we probably will identify the obstacles as being external, because those are probably would be the things that stir up all these emotions in ourselves. And even though we can be very have a big discernment and be aware that it's not the external, the outer phenomena that are causing this, but because we have this misunderstanding about who or what we are, which in Buddhism we call ignorance, then all these emotions like aversion, attachment, and all of that exist. And so because they exist, they sometimes are dormant, and sometimes they are stirred up by certain phenomena that we are confronted with. So even though we might know that the problem is not the phenomena, the people, the words, or the situations, and it's just because we have all these emotions dormant in ourselves, they get fired up when certain things happen, we still can and should actually try to remove ourselves from the presence of those phenomena that are that that stir up these emotions in ourselves when we can. Of course, this is not the ultimate solution, but it might be a temporary one, and we have to be realistic in order to understand if we are ready to face those things and face the emotions that it stirs in us, or if we are not yet ready for that. If we have the choice, sometimes we don't. Sometimes we are confronted with situations that we can't prevent, and in that case, that is a beautiful opportunity to to learn more about our mind and to deal with these emotions, because we have to, and there's no other solution. So now, if we, in Buddhism, there's always different approaches for everything. And so, everything is relative and everything is scalable. So if we now understand all of this, and we have now attained a certain degree of relaxation towards a certain number of things. Doesn't mean that we will be equally relaxed about all emotions or all situations. There will be some which now are a little bit more workable, and others that really are very difficult to face. and still stir up a lot of emotions in ourselves. So if there are certain things that we can deal with, it's really important for us to understand that it is never the things in themselves, but our reactions to them. And so I think also renunciation um, means renouncing a certain number of ideas that we have about things, more than anything. So if we, because when we are, for instance, there are things that um, create a lot of attachment in ourselves. It's because we are looking at those things from a certain perspective. It's the same can be said if there are things that also create a lot of aversion. It's the same principle. It's in the way we see things. And so what should we really abandon or renounce to? I think one of the things it's we should renounce what we have to renounce, whether it's now or if it's something that we will have to do progressively. What we have to renounce is a certain ideas we have about things. Like, for instance, the idea that things are permanent. This is something that we really have to renounce by cultivating the awareness that everything is impermanent. When we see things as impermanent, there is a certain degree of whether it's attachment or aversion that subsides. I was reading the other day this book. I think it's called Old Path, White Clouds. It's Thich Nhat Hanh's book about the Buddha, the story, the life story of the Buddha, and it's a beautiful book. And I was just rereading because I have read it several times, but it's so beautiful that regularly I read it again. And it was just at that part where Prince Siddhartha leaves the palace of his father, and it's just the late evening, and there has been a banquet, and there has been the entertaining dancers and everything, and he goes through, and then now everything is finished, and he crosses, he's about to go away from the palace, and he has this look. He looks on all of the dancers are now lying on the floor asleep, and their hair is all messed up and everything. And there's this sense of, like, when sometimes we are very fascinated by something and we actually are not seeing it correctly or seeing it for what it is. It's like we have built a beautiful story around it. We have embellished it with a sense of, with our desire, whether it's a person, a situation, or an object. And then at some point, when we realize all of that is impermanent, all of that, it's when we come to terms with the reality of things as they are, it's a bit like that kind of look that Prince Siddhartha gives to what was just a few hours ago a beautiful spectacle is now just, you know, the makeup is now has now started to drip, and and there's this smell of sweat, and you know, we are far from the beginning of the show. And that's what happens many times in life. So it's not to say that we should see the negative or the ugly side of things, it's just to see them as they are. And so, as they are, meaning impermanent, for instance, and relative. So everything can be very beautiful, but at the same time, nothing is going to last forever. So seeing things more in that sense, with less fantasizing, with less, whether in positive or negative terms, because we also fantasize in negative terms. When we see somebody or we have a little conflict with somebody, we can also make that person, or create in our mind an idea that that person is a monster, or somebody completely bad, somebody completely negative, and that's not true either. So it's a sort of negative fantasizing, but it's still a fantasy. It's still a fantasy. So renouncing the idea of permanence, renouncing the idea of that things last forever, or that things are that glow that we give to things, either positive or negative, and trying to see things more in their own nature, as they are, as composite, as being a result of innumerous causes and conditions. And also realizing that, renouncing also the idea that we can fix samsara. That's something very difficult to renounce too. What I mean by that is that we still, even after many years of practice, sometimes we are happier and sometimes we are unhappier. But when we are going through some good experiences and we are having a good time, there's sometimes this idea that okay, now it's going in the right direction, and now finally everything is working out. So so in a sense, we still entertain this idea that one day everything is going to be fine, and samsara is finally going to work, like. But as I sometimes say, samsara is unfixable. It's like an old house. When the roof is not leaking, then there's a problem in the kitchen sink or something like that. And if the kitchen sink is okay, then it's the floor starts cracking. And if the floor is fixed, then the windows don't close, and it's never ending. So samsara is a bit like that, and sometimes we feel like we will be able to fix it, whether in our own life or sometimes also like in the global scale. We still entertain ideas that somehow, someday, one day, everything will be perfect, and there's no such thing in samsara. Not because it is an imperfect world, because teachers might tell you differently, but because our perception is flawed. We have a flawed perception, because unless we understand the reality as it is, we will always see things in an imperfect way. So there's no chance. So since samsara is unfixable, there will always also, suffering will never be very far. So also realizing that and renouncing the idea of a perfect happiness within samsara, not that it's not possible to achieve that long-lasting peace and that inner stability and inner well-being. Yes, if we go beyond, if we really have the experience of spiritual realization. Yes, that's the idea. The whole idea of Buddhism is going beyond suffering. But until we are in samsara, until we have not dispelled this false um, understanding of what or whom we really are, and uh, what's the nature of phenomena, there is no possibility for samsara to become a perfect place, or we cannot fix samsara. That doesn't mean that there's not something to do, but that will be part of the second aspect of today's topic, like the skillful means. So renouncing also, we could renounce to, is also this idea that things exist in a very solid way. And for that, we have to develop this understanding of interdependence as the nature of things, that things are never inherently existent. There's no such thing or such phenomena or even person. And we have to understand, or come to understand and slowly understand, that everything is a result of many causes and many circumstances. And that all together, all those factors, when all of them are together, then a certain situation, person, phenomena arises. And understanding that might seem like something very theoretical, but this has a very big impact in how we react to things and how we can deal with things. Like, for instance, if we have a certain situation that is very difficult or very unpleasant or even very painful, we sometimes think that we have to change the whole situation in order for us to feel better, in order for us to stop suffering so much or feel a little bit better. We might think that we have to change the whole situation. Sometimes that is not possible. So we get stuck. But if we understand that that situation is actually a puzzle or a result of many small factors, some bigger, some smaller, but it's just a result of so many things, then we understand that by changing one small thing, something that we can actually change, then it will create a little change in the situation. Maybe it will become a little bit easier to deal with, but that opens space for another change and another change, and finally little change after little change. We will possibly make the situation much better, much easier to handle. And there's always something we can change, which is our attitude towards that situation. The way we react to the situation is something, even if no external factor can be changed, we can change ourselves, we can change from inside. So understanding interdependence is very practical, and renouncing the idea that things exist in an intrinsic, independent way is part of, it's actually renouncing false ideas about things, like the idea of permanence, or the idea that it is possible to achieve perfect happiness within samsara, or the idea that things are inherently existing. All of those false views, actually, we can call them like that, it's what we really truly have to renounce, because that's what is hindering our experience of things as they are, instead of things as we project them to be. So now that might then, as I said, if there are things that we are very attached to, or things that we have a stronger version, or things like that, we might need to take some outer steps in order to feel, to find a little inner peace. But ultimately, it's not the things in themselves, it's not the outer phenomena, it's not the outer situations, it's not the people around us. That's all to do with the way we view things and the way we conceive or label or conceptualize everything, all the experiences in our lives. Now, when we talk about skillful means, it might even sound a little odd, like something might not even sound very positive, but actually it's used as within the Mahayana Buddhism. Skillful means is used as a alternative to compassion. Actually, sometimes we talk about wisdom and compassion, and sometimes we also can talk about wisdom and skillful means. Skillful means, once we have attained a certain degree of experience in the Dharma, ultimately, if we have the perfect realization of the Buddha, but even before that, I mean, just if we have a little experience, a little view of the Dharma, and we have an attitude of a little altruistic, maybe even some aspiration to become a bodhisattva, or if we have this motivation of the enlightened mind, like the wish to attain enlightenment for the sake of all beings, then, and if we have, for instance, taken formally or informally the vow of the bodhisattva, so we have vowed to help all beings to liberate themselves from the suffering and from the wrong views that keep them keep us accumulating causes of further causes of suffering, then we are in the world. We can feel ourselves, or we feel the need to be in this world, to be sort of, maybe the word is a bit strong, but you will get what I mean, be kind of activists of Buddha nature, or Buddhahood, or Tathagata Garbo, or whatever you want to call it. In this sense, not that we're going to go and knock at everybody's door to talk about the Buddhism or the Dharma or anything. We don't strive to convince everybody or convince anybody about anything, but just we have this wish to express through our actions, words, thoughts, attitudes, to express this dignity, this noble heart, this aspiration of Buddhahood around us in the society. And then that's when skillful means comes about. And why do we need to be skillful? What are we talking about? So, why do we have to be skillful? Because everybody is at different levels of understanding. Just because something is really clear for us, something is very obvious, for instance, and it sounds really true, doesn't mean that it's going to be true or accepted or even understood by anybody else. So we have to be skillful because when we express ourselves, even if we have the best of intentions, we can actually create more harm than good if we are not skillful in the way we express things or we do things and so on and so forth. So being skillful means understanding all situations, understanding all the factors, understanding that even if we have a good intention, but we are acting in the middle of society, we are actually surrounded by people that might not, or most certainly almost, don't have the same view as we do. So we have to be skillful in the sense that we have to adjust our behavior in order to not, for instance, not confront other people, not um, uh, not create a resistance in them, which sometimes sometimes we might feel that if we don't provoke or create some degree of confrontation, nothing changes in the society. And that's why there's no simple response, or there's no simple formula. We can't really say this is how we should act and this is how one shouldn't act. But there is definitely one thing that is very important, and perhaps I've already talked about this, I think in the first 2 weeks ago, is that whatever we do or say, or whatever our actions of engaging in society or engaging in skillful means, in a way helping other people or trying to at least inspire them or anything, there's a very important thing, which is not that in whatever we do, our motivation should never be trying to be right or acting out of um, righteousness. We're not trying to impose anything, or even to prove anything, to prove anybody wrong, or to put ourselves right, or anything like that. And so we should always be careful that even if we are trying something very good, even if we are doing something very positive, it still should be adapted to the reality of the situation. We can't just think of things in as principles, or how would it be perfect, because there's no perfection. As I said, samsara is an imperfect state, so there will never be anything perfect, and we will never be able to fix samsara. So we really have to just do the best we can, but still always being careful not to do it in a way that is just a self-affirmation, just for prove ourselves right or anything like that. And also, it should always be adjusted to the reality of the situation, to the reality of the people we are working with or working for, and adjusted and according to their own understanding. Not something that, even it can be very ultimate, can be very interesting, can be very intelligent or very clever, but if it's not meeting people's needs, then it's just not appropriate. And we are actually doing it for our own satisfaction, and not necessarily to be helpful or to be appropriate or to be um, uh, as a response to a real need. We are imposing our own way of thinking or our own way of doing things, regardless to the situation or to the needs of people. So, so that's why we really need to let go of all the things that I said precedently. Um, to all of those false ideas uh, and the need of validation. So if we let go of that, then we can truly practice skillful means, or being able to adjust our action to the actual needs of the situation. And this, I know it's very theoretical. Um, and that's why perhaps if somebody has any practical, or somebody or several people have practical questions, it might help with concrete examples to see how we can sort of um, adjust, or how we can combine these two in our actions in society, or within our own family or group of friends or whatever.